If you want a one-sentence answer to the question of how good is the new MacBook Pro, let me sum it up for you. It is the best, no compromise workstation computer I have ever owned. What's up everybody, it's Joe with J Blake Photo. I've been using workstation style computers since I was about 8 years old. And to this day, I switch between Windows, desktops, laptops, Macs, depending on the situation. These are tools, but I have not yet had a personal computer that offered as close to perfection for what I need and what I want as this new laptop has. I started using Macs in 2010. Switching from a big, heavy Windows laptop, workstation laptop, big old 17-inch Dell Studio laptop, to an Intel-based iMac, and then soon after I added the MacBook Air to my kind of constellation of computers. I was doing photography and I needed a big screen and a powerful computer. The iMac gave me that, but it had its drawbacks. It got hot, it got loud, it had a spinning hard disk that was not super fast, and the MacBook Air was super fast, had a great hard drive, but it had a small screen, the graphics were nil, and it made photo and video editing pretty slow. But it was mobile. And then in 2018, I picked up a 2015 MacBook Pro. I will link above to and below to the video that I did about why I bought a 2015 MacBook Pro in 2018. But to sum it up, this machine was fast. It had tons of ports. It had a great keyboard, much better than what I thought was being offered at that time with the new butterfly keyboard style MacBooks. I bought that machine to replace the iMac and the Air, and it did great doing both. But as I started shooting more video, especially with drones like the Mavic and Mavic 2 and the GoPros, I saw pretty quickly that the 3-year-old GPU and the CPU just couldn't handle specifically the codecs that I was throwing at it. The H.265, the HEVC codecs that are used in the GoPro and in the Mavic just weren't something that it was able to handle. So I added an eGPU. And again, I will link to videos that I did about that. That made editing a lot easier. Rendering was fast. I was able to kind of scroll through footage relatively quickly. But using modern plugins and decoding some of the newer HEVC-based videos, especially from the Mavic 2 Pro, it was still a little chunky. I still found myself using proxy files, especially when I was doing a lot of effects or a lot of, color correction, things like that. As I started getting better and better at handling that footage and at really kind of playing with it. But I was still getting beach balls when I was video editing, not to mention the hangs and the pauses, especially when using Lightroom. Don't get me started on using Photoshop on that laptop. It was very difficult. So after 2 years, I upgraded again and got the 2019 MacBook Pro, the 16-inch. I loaded it up with a Core i9 8-core processor, 32 gigs of RAM, and I went with the upgraded AMD RX 5500M GPU that was supposed to solve all of these problems. And this machine was fast, don't get me wrong. It could handle the encode and decode of the video signals that I was working with. It could render really quickly. Lightroom was fast, especially after a few updates from Adobe, and Photoshop was much, much better. I did find myself still having to use the eGPU though, because with the RX 5500, if I was just using the laptop by itself, rendering and editing wasn't that difficult. But if I had, again, a lot going on, or if I was comparing it to the eGPU speed, it was still faster with the eGPU attached. But here's the thing, this computer would get hot surfing the web. The fans would run at full blast if I just used the Thunderbolt port to copy files from external storage. If I was scrubbing through footage from the R6 or the Mavic 2 Pro, all 8 cores would be maxed out, and it would still sometimes stutter in high quality setting in Final Cut, and I would have to switch from high quality to performance, which meant that I wasn't seeing full resolution and I wasn't getting all the detail. Lightroom was quick, but if you did an import, the process of building previews would bring this machine to a halt. It would bring it to its knees, and the entire machine would be pulling 100 watts of power, and I would end up really not able to use the machine. I couldn't like switch to another app or even surf the web. When I would edit in Final Cut, the background renderer would cause the GPU or the CPU and the eGPU also to max out. And the eGPU has an upgraded like 400 watt power supply for the MSI Vega 56 card that I had in it running over Thunderbolt 3. And so these tasks that I was doing, working with Photoshop, with running a plugin, importing and building previews in Lightroom, doing background rendering and final rendering in Final Cut, these would just max out the machine, and it would just sound like it was about to fly off the table, and it would get super hot. And that was when I was using it here in the office. If I was on the couch trying to, if you've watched my channel a lot, you know that I like to sit on the couch watching stupid TV with my wife, and chatting with her while I do edits. If I tried to do that, it would last about an hour on my lap if I didn't have it plugged in, and it would burn my legs. So I spent a lot of time here doing a lot of my editing. Now, don't get me wrong though, it was fast when you set it to a task. Rendering, quick. Imports, fast. Ingesting video and photos weren't really difficult. It did really well. It didn't slow me down. It just, it would get hot. I just kind of had to walk away, which was fine, right? Or if I could, I would, surf the web, watching YouTube videos or something. Normally, I'd end up watching YouTube videos on my phone because the laptop really wasn't usable at that point. But I always had to make sure that I had my noise canceling headphones on, or else, yeah, I wasn't going to have a good experience. Then the MacBook Pro with the M1 Pro and M1 Max comes out. I did my research, I decided what specs I wanted, and I ordered. I was honestly 50-50 on keeping the 16-inch. I liked the screen size, it was nice. I also liked the battery life. I like the keyboard. I like having 4 Thunderbolt ports. I like access to an eGPU and upgrades that I can do in that box. I like the big speakers. But I missed a smaller laptop, right? I came from the MacBook Air, and I wanted to see if the hype was real. So I ordered a 14-inch with the M1 Max, 32 gigabytes of RAM, and the 24-core GPU. I stuck with the 1 terabyte of storage, and I waited for about 3 weeks for it to arrive. I tell you all of this, right? I'm sure there's half of you who are gonna go down in the comments and say, oh, the review starts at 5 minutes and 25 seconds, and that's fine. But I wanna tell you what my experience was when I started using this laptop. When it arrived, I was surprised, and in a couple of different ways. And I was surprised at what I was surprised by. So first, I installed all my apps. I had every intention of doing some basic testing. I knew it would be fast. I wasn't sure how fast, but immediately I was faced with the first kind of surprising incident: the keyboard. So I know a lot of people have said that it's not really that different, but to me, it actually felt quite a bit different. I can't really explain it. I put the two side by side. The keys are slightly closer together, but also a little bit larger, I think. I don't know. It's more of a feeling. It felt more clunky, but in a good way. Less clacky, less ticky-tacky. The sound was nicer. The texture was nicer. And so for someone who really wants to be able to sit on the couch and edit photos and video, that was really, really nice to know that that keyboard was going to be a little bit better. But again, I was 50-50 on whether or not I wanted to keep this laptop. I bought it with every intention of giving it a full run through and deciding whether or not I wanted to invest in the upgrade or keep my 16-inch for a few more years, a few more iterations, and switch at some point in the future. The setup process was quick and snappy, no issues. But you kind of expect that from a modern Mac. If you have a lot of your stuff in their ecosystem like I do, honestly, it just works, right? The speakers seem to be about the same as the 16-inch, which was nice since these are smaller. But once I had my apps installed, I had two sets of tests that I really wanted to run. The two things that, number one, can take a lot of my time, but also tend to be just irritations. I had watched hours and hours of benchmarks on YouTube, but none of them seemed to do the two things that really sucked the most of my time. One was doing background rendering in Final Cut. And when I say time, I mean hangs and pauses and waiting and all that sort of stuff. And then also scrolling through large libraries of files and imports in Lightroom. Those are the two things that I said, you know what, if it can really make this better, these individual tasks where I have to set it to this task and either step away or listen to the fans run, you know, at 5,000 RPM for 25 minutes. If this can help me make that better, then it might be worth the switch. So the first quick project that I set up in Final Cut was some footage from the Canon R6 and some from the Mavic Pro 2. This is what I shoot the most, so this is what I wanted to compare the most. I put some LUTs, some adjustments, some text layers on this project, and since all my projects have some of that, I wanted to make sure that it really kind of represented a version of something I would do. This clip ended up being about a minute in total length, so not very long, and it didn't have a lot going on, but I knew that it had a little bit of everything. Now, the 16-inch was set up with the power from the wall, and hooked up to the eGPU with the Vega 56. And the export was a H.265, an HEVC clip in 4K HDR HLG with Rec 2020. So I made sure that the background rendering was turned off on both computers, and on the 16-inch, the export took about 2 minutes. On the 14-inch, it took 20 seconds. 20 seconds. Okay, so that's not bad. 6 times faster. But the reason that I use Final Cut is I love background rendering, right? I can be working on a project and I know that normally those ProRes renders are ready to be exported when I'm done editing. It just makes things easy. So I decided to test how long it would take to do a background render. So I rechecked the box for background rendering, and as soon as I hit the box, I started timing. And the best that I could record for how the 16-inch did was 58 seconds. So about real time for this 1 minute long video. The 14-inch did it in 16 seconds. That's more than 3 times faster than the Intel 8 core with an external GPU. Now, for those who are curious about the eGPU, yes, it is still faster than the RX 5500M in the 16-inch, since it has a dedicated 8 gigs of RAM, and honestly, it has a 400 watt power supply. So it's got a lot of headroom in that enclosure. It's also working on the 40 gigabit Thunderbolt lane, and this test did not have it attached to a screen, but for rendering performance, that doesn't really matter since I'm not doing gaming or anything where I need it to export frames per second to a screen. I've done the tests. It's still 20 to 30% faster than the GPU in the laptop, even when it's not attached to a screen. The computer still recognizes it as an eGPU, and Final Cut still sees it as the primary renderer and export hardware. Did I mention that the 14-inch was unplugged for these tests? I don't know. I didn't find it to be an issue, and it ticked down maybe 8 or 9% while I was doing these tests over, I don't know, probably 45 minutes to an hour. Okay. So the 14-inch renders fast, right? And it background renders fast. But let me tell you another thing that really surprised me about these tests. Now, I mentioned that I added two different types of footage here, right? The Mavic footage and the R6 footage. I have never, ever been able to drop footage into a timeline and just hit play without some stuttering, pausing before it would play back. Not to mention when you have adjustment layers that you've extended over new clips or effect presets that you've dropped onto them, I can't just play those. I mean, I can try, but after 10 seconds of pausing, maybe 1 to 2 seconds of stuttering, it normally smooths itself out, right? And I'll let it render and it'll be fine. And then I can check the results. Normally I let it run through and then I go back, then I run through it again. Not on the 14-inch. It just plays. LUTs, it plays. Sharpening, vibrance, color correction, adjustment layers, transitions, it just plays. It just runs in real time without rendering. Now, the other thing that I mentioned were titles. Well, I like using fun titles in my videos. Tracking objects, fun text effects when I talk about specs and megapixels, or little graphics down here telling you to like and subscribe. Now, when you drop a plug-in text effect, that was when things got kind of hairy over on the Intel side. You'd have some pauses, some slowdowns, some halts, some beach balls, some crashes, or videos that just ran like garbage. You know, these titles, I use them a lot in my edits. I make sure I know what they are before I drop them in. And sometimes I'll do, you know, edited versions in motion before I drop them in so that I don't have to really interact with the inspector on these clips because it can be mind-numbingly slow. On the 14-inch, it's like they're native. They just run. Now, I don't know if that's because some of these plugin vendors have, you know, I mean, obviously they've optimized their applications, their plugins for M1 and now M1 Max, but they just work and they're fast. I mean, before they were optimized for Intel, right? I was shocked. I was honestly shocked. Not because of how fast, but because of how not slow it was. This wasn't something I could measure. This was just something that worked without any issue. And I was really, really surprised at how well it worked. There was one more thing in Final Cut that surprised me, and that was the screen. Honestly, I had heard people talk about it, and I figured, well, I normally attach to an external monitor. I've got a 32-inch screen sitting right here that I normally work on. So the screen's a nice bonus, but it wasn't really something that I was concerned about, except when I'm mobile, which is, you know, when I'm down on the couch or when I travel. Not anymore. This screen is amazing. HDR just kind of comes alive. I don't edit in HDR normally. I've not really had a lot of motivation to do it, but I've been shooting in 10-bit log on the Mavic 2 Pro for over 2 years, and for the last year plus with the R6. So I have almost 3 years of footage of some sort that is 10-bit log that I could turn into HDR footage. I now want to go back and re-edit all of my outdoor adventures in HDR. It's amazing. And the screen on the 14-inch is the best that I have ever looked at. I did some HDR test clips where I put some footage from the R6 and some footage that I had shot with the Mavic 2 Pro in Maui and out in other various places that I've been, and made just a 3 or 4 minute clip of all HDR footage and watched it back on this screen, and it looked so amazing. On the 14-inch, it was great. On my iPhone, I have an iPhone 13 Pro Max. It was just phenomenal with that OLED screen. On my Vizio, on my 65-inch Vizio that I have in my living room, it was okay. And that's full Dolby Vision with 64 local dimming zones. So I guess OLED and micro LED are the way to go. I mean, wow. Just wow. I get it now. Now moving on to Lightroom. So I've had a catalog in Lightroom that is over 12 years old. It has 110,000 photographs in it. And some of those photos go back to 2002 when I got my first Fujifilm point and shoot camera, or before when I shot film and had it scanned. Now, I didn't want to sit and let Lightroom re-render previews of this giant catalog, so I copied the catalog and I copied the preview database, all 75 gigabytes of it. The catalog itself is in terabytes and stored on an external Drobo 5D that's attached via Thunderbolt. So I opened the catalog, I let it start a preview file, then I closed it. Then I replaced that preview file with my already populated database and reopened the catalog. Within about 1 minute, I could easily see that all the files were registered, accessible to Lightroom, everything looked like it had a preview. I'd never really done that before, so I can't tell you if it was faster or not. But then I did a thing that I thought would test Lightroom on Apple Silicon. The new laptop, the external storage, I thought this would be just a great all-around test. I selected in my catalog the All Photographs category, and I just scrolled. Now, you could always do this, but you'd be staring at gray boxes where the photo previews would be, and then eventually, after a few seconds of waiting, they would catch up and show you the images. This was so fast that the photos showed up as I was scrolling and beat me to the bottom of the catalog. So at this point, I am literally trying to get it to slow down. So I would quickly scroll to a file, open it up, right, double click, open it up really quick, and then zoom to 200 or 300% to force it to pull the full RAW file and show me the details. Now, normally when I would do this on the Intel Mac, I'd get a preview first, then I would zoom in, then you'd see a low-res pixelated version, and then after a few seconds of pausing, I would finally see the full version. But there would be halts and stops and pauses all throughout that experience. So why is this important? Well, if I'm looking at a handful of shots and maybe all of them are similar and I'm looking for one that had good focus, maybe I'm making sure that I got good eyes that were open, a good smile, all the members of a family are all looking in the same direction so I don't have to do a whole lot of Photoshop stuff. I'll often zoom and toggle through the best photos to see which ones have all those things. When you have a large batch of images, that's what you do. It can be time consuming. And on the 14-inch MacBook Pro with the M1 Max, this is no longer an issue. It flies. Now, there are times where I have to wait for a second for the full version to load, but I attribute that to the Drobo, not to the laptop, because it is an external RAID array using spinning hard drives. I normally do that kind of thing with a working copy of the photo shoot on my desktop or somewhere on the computer, which would make things really, really fast. So I haven't tested that yet, but the half second that I need to wait for a full res image to display, not really noticeable when it does happen. So I said at the top of this video that the 2021 MacBook Pro 14-inch was the most uncompromised workstation laptop that I've ever owned. I did go with a smaller version, and so far I'm pretty happy with that choice. But it's just that, a choice, not a compromise. Sure, it has lower battery life than the 16-inch, but that's physics. Larger batteries last longer. Bigger cases give you larger, slightly quieter fans. I can tell you that I've had this fan at full, rendering that HDR project that I was talking about, and it took a while to encode, right? It's 10-bit HEVC, and the fan's cranked. But even at full speed, it was quieter than the 16-inch. So there you have it. Are there things I still would have wanted? Sure. A fourth Thunderbolt port, HDMI 2.0, UHS 3's SD card slot. But I haven't really run into an issue where that's impacted me. I don't know, we'll see. I haven't used the HDMI port, and the SD card port I've only used a few times, and it was very fast. I have ultimately been delighted by this computer. It has solved almost all of my problems with my previous setup. Now, if you're interested in more content on specific items with this machine, let me know down in the comments and I'll do my best to put something together. And if you like me talking about Mac gear, let me know and go ahead and hit the like button. It helps YouTube know that this is the right content for you and for the rest of my audience. As always, you can find me over at jblake.photo on Instagram. And lastly, if you'd please consider subscribing to the channel, hitting like on this video and clicking the bell so that you know when I make my next video. And I will see you in the next one. Have a great day.